Thank you for joining us on the Coffee Roaster Warm-Up Sessions podcast. In this episode, we're diving into the dynamics between brewing a coffee at home versus going to a cafe for a cup of coffee. Now, what we've been hearing from some locals, but also the broader internet coffee community, is this question of, is it really worth going to a cafe nowadays? Especially with maybe you have a really amazing setup at home with the right gear and the proper tools to make a really exceptional coffee, with the accessibility of brewing any roaster really in the world. Is this still worth going into a cafe? And also, while you run the risk of getting a coffee that might not be pulled properly or extracted properly on espresso or on pour over. A lot of these things we dive into this episode, and also give especially cafe managers and cafe owners maybe some food for thought on how do we address this and how do we kick our cafes up a notch so that they can be providing exceptional value for a guest that's walking in that may have a killer setup at home. Anyways, enough yapping. Let's get into it. My name is Mark Kotrovsky, and I'm here with Sergey Kotrovsky, co-hosts of the Coffee Roaster Warm Sessions podcast. By Mira Coffee Roasters. We run a small little roasting company out of the Pacific Northwest out in Bellingham.
Just south of the border.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Explaining to people where Bellingham is, it's like, oh, you mean like around Seattle? No. Canada. I'm in Canada. Yeah. So that seems to make sense a lot more for people. So
yep, that is true.
I don't know. All right, let's pour some batchy.
I will never stop geeking over and being fascinated at how good this spout is.
This spout is really powerful.
It's
good.
You know how when you're like shopping for clothes online?
So good. It's so good.
You know, if you're like, you know, whatever your favorite clothing brand is or shoes, and you're out there shopping and you look at sizing, you look at the sizing chart, the graphs, how do they size things? At least I do that. And then it says true to size. I usually don't trust that because
what's that mean, true to size?
Right. That's what I say. Like, true to whose size?
Right.
Like, are you saying it's 100% accurate to the U.S. sizing like thing? With this spout, if I had to write a description, some copy for a fellow in the Aiden, I would say true to fact, no drip spout.
It's true.
Like, it's so good. Like, there's a little bit of like liquid on the tip right there. Like, no drip. Yeah. Just solid. And it's not complicated. Like, metal just bent out. It's slightly rough. Like, it's solid.
I'm fascinated by the fact that, you know, some folks can make a spout that's bad. Like, I feel like a spout is like the most like
Mark, that was the most passive dig at another company.
I'm sorry. Like, it's like the most basic like creation.
Right.
Like, I feel like from like when you're a child, you've just been eyeballing spouts your whole life.
Your whole life.
Because you're pouring. All the time.
I mean, babies really have a preference on the type of bottle they're drinking from.
Exactly. So
they should be in charge of, like, you know, Baby Genius, basically. Like, they should be in charge.
That's a classic. Yeah, that's good. Wow.
That's pretty nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it.
I'm driving on the quality of brew here. Not necessarily like, it's not like anything wild or extraordinary in the flavor profile.
Coffee, but it's nice.
But it's nice. It's nailed.
Peach, nectarine, hibiscus.
Some brown sugar.
That's nice. It's complex in a very strange way. Like, it's almost one of those things. Like, if it was on a label, you're like, do these flavors even work together?
Yeah.
But it's nice.
No complaints at all. This is solid.
It's solid.
If somebody served this to me, just blindly, or just made it for me, I'd be like, great. Yeah. This is great. Yeah. This is our Columbia Miller.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, we literally just cupped.
Really?
Yeah.
Which roast?
Last week's.
Ah, gotcha. That makes sense.
A little more juicier. A little
juicier, a little brighter.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, this is great. Yeah. I brewed this coffee. I was talking to you about it. Like, a lot of the Mira coffees I brew like a month off of roast. I'm like slowly catching up. And slowly it's like, I'll collect little samples here and there from the roastery after a roast date. and then brew them later. And it's like, usually our coffees are so nice a month off a roast. Same thing, like the Choroso, I posted about it on my Instagram. It's just like, just great.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
my best brew of the Choroso of all time that we've had it was that one brew. Just great. Like, could not complain about it. And then same thing with this coffee. I think especially since we like tweaked a little bit of the profile here and there, I'm fascinated with this coffee.
Yeah.
It's kind of resurfacing as one of my favorites again.
That roast needs a little bit more rest for sure.
Yeah.
It's just barely a week off, but even just a week off, I mean, you're still getting really solid clarity, flavor, experience. It's juicy. Yeah. I mean, on top of that, also, if somebody served this to me at a cafe, I would be happy.
Through a batch brewer, that is.
Honestly,
not a hand brew.
I hate to be this guy, but even if they served this to me, like if they said, oh yeah, like I'll make you a pour over and brewed this like under the counter with the fellow Aiden and then served it to me, I'd probably be fooled by it, to be honest. Yeah. And I'd be like, okay, this is solid. Yeah. And I'm getting everything I want out of it. Yeah. And it's got great mouthfeel. It's juicy. It's flavor clarity's there. Yeah. And it's a fellow batch brewer.
Not even
beverage. That's insane.
It's not even a commercial machine.
Yeah.
Technically, right?
Yeah. And so that's
pretty wild.
Yeah. So and that's also because like I know this has come up in several podcast episodes recently, with Weber, with Alex, with us talking about it, but like, man, to get like really solid pour overs at cafes is like, it is not it's like more often than not you're getting just like okay solid.
Yeah.
But I also think that like when you look at this and this machine that people have at home, without, I mean, of course, like we're using an EK43, so that's it definitely has a lot to do with it. But yeah, when somebody has like a fellow Aiden, it's like, okay, so why would I go to a cafe,
right,
if I can just dump some grounds on a solid like, and honestly, like this is like as minimal of a setup. It's a scale, a grinder, and an Aiden.
That's it.
You literally do not even need, and that's tap water again. Of course, we have pretty decent tap water up here, but so I don't know. That's to kick this off.
Today, when I was working behind the bar, remember that one dude that you were talking to, Whole Foods, the older guy, scruffy. Yeah. He comes in like buys bags of coffees for him like for like a month or so, and he'll like go to Alaska or something. Yeah. Anyway, so he came into. He's like, "Oh, dude, what's up? I haven't seen you. I haven't seen him since I think a couple of weeks before Christmas." And we were catching up, and he's like, "Dude, you missed it. My family was in town for Christmas. I was gonna introduce my son to you and tell him like he's like." And then he describes his son, and I'm like, "Dude, classic." I just smiled, kind of laughed at him because. Classic description. Oh yeah, my son's really serious about coffee. He does the classic needle thing. He has all the devices. His like prep to brew a coffee like is like 20 minutes. And there's this in his conversation is a super big emphasis on how long it takes him to make a good cup of coffee.
Right.
So that was one emphasis. The other emphasis was he drinks so much coffee at home that he like doesn't go to cafes a lot. Yeah. And then the other emphasis he had in the conversation was the gear he used. And it was like a major like 3-part thing that I've been thinking about. You and I have been talking about it a lot, like what brings people into cafes. And I thought that was super interesting that one, he was so excited to talk about his son with this amazing cafe setup at home, basically.
Right.
The nerdiness around coffee. And then also he came in there just to get a cortado. Like, I think it's hard. I want to paint the picture. Like I'm talking about a dude who's in his probably late 50s, 60s, maybe. He's like older, not super, like not a grandpa, but he's older. And the excitement he got around sharing his favorite coffee place with his classic, stereotypical home barista son, the trifecta right there, dude, hit the spot. And I think that's a very important question, one for us to think about and in this podcast to tackle is like, are home baristas getting so good at brewing at home that, one, they're better than pro coffee pros or like professional baristas? And in that context, because home baristas are brewing such great coffee, is it now discouraging them from entering into the cafe? You know, and it also, this idea's been on my mind, and it sparked off that Instagram post. You probably saw it in my story. And I got a like decent response. I get good responses, but almost 100 votes for me, that's a pretty big deal.
Sergi's utilizing his journalist degree that he almost got back in the day. Just almost got it, dude. He's just making his own coffee stats.
Shouldn't have dropped out. Yeah. Anyway, here are some numbers. 63% of the voters on Instagram said no. Brewing coffee at home does not discourage them.
It's out of 100 people?
That's out of 100, yeah.
Okay, so this is easy math. So 63 people, approximately.
Yeah, approximately. 37 said yes, that brewing coffee at home does discourage them from going into a cafe. Now, those are pretty big numbers, because even if we look at the yeses, 37% or 37 out of 100 people are not. From a cafe manager or coffee company owners, those are big numbers. Yeah. Like revenue-wise, if you think about it, those are big numbers, right? Right. It's very impactful numbers. Now, the caveat, 63% that said no, those folks, I would say, from just judging, I didn't do the math on this, majority of them were already coffee professionals. Even one of them, my buddy Chris.
Coffee professionals, you mean
they work
in the coffee industry.
They get paid to either make coffee or do something in coffee in a cafe. Okay. So with that said, one of my buddies, Chris, he works at St. Frank's, has been at St. Frank's for a long time. Great buddy of mine. Super cool dude. I mean, I have so many stories. I mean, we slept on the same couch together for a while. So good dude, good friend of mine. His response was like super, super sick. He was saying that after, working in a cafe, he's like, I just don't want to come home and work again. So again, and I think if you're listening to this podcast and you're someone who works in coffee, that concept is like, yeah, you get it. It's like you've been brewing coffee all day. You kind of don't want to do it. For me, on the other hand, I literally sometimes take a break to go home and brew coffee for Maddie. So I'm like consistently brewing coffee wherever I'm at. So that is the anomaly, I think, of the 63%. Right. Are the people who are already doing it as a career. Yeah. So therefore it makes sense why they wouldn't want to do it at home. Now, I think the bigger conversation here is the 37%. So another person reached out, Justin. He's like, this is a quote. He said, there's no cafe close that does 30% of the job I can do at home. So that statement, go ahead.
I was going to say he also works in coffee.
I guess loosely now, yeah.
He manages a cafe.
He still manages a cafe?
Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay. So I thought he.
But his comment still matters. Valid.
Yeah.
What did he say?
Yeah. So with taking that comment and unpacking that, the major crux of brewing at home, especially for folks like Justin, is quality metric, right? Right. It's hard to find a cafe that meets my quality standard. And if I can do it at home for the fraction of the price because I already have gear and I've invested into gear, like there's a lot to unpack there, but still it's like, oh, home is a safer option. Yeah. That's a big deal. So there's that at play. I think majority of the DMs that I got to sum all of them up, there was a lot. Our buddy Camden that talked to us a lot about this, but majority of the folks said, like, if I go into a cafe and I can brew coffee at home, let's say you just have a batch brewer, not at Aiden, but you have decent Bonavita batch brewer, you're drinking coffee at home simply for caffeine and you might be going to get an experience, quote unquote, in a cafe. So I think those are three main things that we can kind of dive into and kind of unpack there. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think that, just interesting that people who work in the coffee shop or in coffee won't necessarily go out and grab coffee at cafes. No. People who work in coffee aren't as focused on doing that, coming back and doing it at home and brewing coffee at home. However, people who have a good solid setup at home are not drawn to go into a cafe to buy coffee there because oftentimes they can achieve a better result at home. Yeah. That inverse relationship is so interesting.
It's very interesting.
And and it brings up the question of like why what does that mean for like a cafe if people are starting to brew coffee way tastier at home? It's coming out to being more affordable at home, especially for people who have like really nice solid setups. They have flexibility. They have, they can tailor their coffee flavor profile to whatever they want. Yeah. And they have all the skill to do that as well. Yeah. Like they're very, very skilled and very knowledgeable too. And, Well, you don't think home baristas are skilled?
No, I am
you're talking too much of a blanket statement. Yeah.
It is. I was gonna say if you're like broad, like I get that. Like, and here's a few things that I would argue with that. One, who's the barista that we're using as a quality metric for skill? Right. Is it the barista that's like competing in Brewers Cup, USBC? Like, what kind of barista are we talking about? Right. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's way too many people that are titled barista. Right. So it's really hard. Like, for example, like myself, like I've brewed thousands of cups of coffee. Way too many, right? To say that a home barista has the same, not even like skill level experience as I do is not fair. Because for them to brew that many cups of coffee at home is going to take way more years than my almost a decade working in coffee.
Which we can just, that brings up the idea of like, we have some friends or some acquaintances that have worked for example, like Onyx Coffee Lab, that I think they have like a 6-month vetting process before you get behind the bar, or like something ridiculous, 6 or 8. I could be wrong. Don't quote me, but let's just say it's not like hey, here's a couple week training
orientation.
Let's get
hop on bar.
It's like this is like you have to be committed to get behind the machine and brew somebody a coffee that they're going to enjoy. Yeah, and so. You're right that like it depends on what barista we're talking about here. Not all baristas are the same of skill level, experience, or whatever. But I think that's a part of the question that cafes should be addressing. Is what are you doing on the training side that can get baristas up to par that would result in a tasty cup where somebody who brews coffee at home, and I'd probably count myself somebody who brews coffee at home or here in the office, that I would feel like, oh, if I go there, I'm going to get a cup that I can't actually make at home or that rivals my cup at home.
Right. Yeah.
Like, how can we get there with training? Yeah. Can we get there with staff? And I know that touches up on like a whole chain of events, right? Churn of your employees, training, barrier to entry, all that stuff. But that needs to be talked about because, people are considering not going to a cafe because of that. Yeah. But also, But also like the factor of like, oh, you're also paying like a premium for it. Like for a pour over, we're taking pour over very like that's kind of the focus. But if you're going to a cafe and you're paying $8, $9 for a pour over of like a really nice, lovely coffee, I hope that the way it's being prepared and served to me and the quality of the cup matches what I'm giving.
Yeah, 100%.
Especially when I have a tasty setup at home.
Yep.
And options at home. I don't know.
Yeah, 100%. And especially because I think we're not talking about these slight little margins. You know, if it was like, 99 to 1, kind of like an outlier here and there, like these numbers are they have very, very, these are very big and important numbers in my opinion. So there's a lot of ways that I think we can actually incentivize baristas to come into a cafe. A few things you just mentioned. The other thing
baristas
is... home baristas, like home brewers to come into a cafe. A lot of the things I think, if you look at what home baristas value, and if you can't match that value via brew, like just your extraction, how you prepare the coffee, right? Then you have to match it on another level. Like you better have the softest chairs...
right,
to drink a cup of coffee in.
Right.
If you can't match them on the level of brewing expertise, then match them on the level of aesthetic.
Right.
Then match them on the level of plants. Match them on the level of, I don't know, music.
Right.
Like you have to, because it's getting to the point where 37 out of 100 people are saying, I'll probably just stay at home. So, and I don't have a problem with charging a premium price for a cup of coffee if it's justifiable. Like if there's a reason that I'm paying, like, whatever, $50 a cup. Like,
right.
It better be worth $50 a cup.
Yes.
And that has to do with more than just the quality of the cup. That has to do with your interaction with the barista. Like we always talk about, hospitality is what you're actually paying for, not just the caffeine. Yeah. So you have to match that. And then on top of that, if your coffee selection in the cafe is not intriguing to a home barista, then there's going to be a reason why they're going to go and just order online from another roaster. Right. So create a coffee, like especially if you're like a roasting company that has a cafe, you have to curate a coffee menu that will intrigue the barista. If they're making one visit a month into a cafe, that it better be your cafe that they're going to enter in.
100%. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. And this is like a pain point, like for me as well. Like, I mean, you've seen, I've lowered my cafe visitation by quite a bit, like dramatically. And a big chunk of that is I just realized, like, I'm like, I'll go in and, like, I don't know, 7 out of 10 times I'm not enjoying my cup. Especially that's usually me coming from like, I just brewed a cup before going to the cafe. I had my pre-cafe, pre-game. Yeah. And it tasted phenomenal. Yeah. And then I go and I have the monetary exchange. Yeah. And I'm not getting something that matches my... And so that's like, again, we're touching on a lot of things. I think from like a cafe manager or owner standpoint, I think this does come down to like value. How do you pack your cafe with value that meets the monetary exchange that's happening? And so again, like that, training is getting on your training. It's like curating a coffee menu. I actually think, I've been thinking about this. I think this is where multi-roasters actually crush.
Yeah.
For you, like
exactly.
From a roaster standpoint, if we were to have a cafe, we actually can't curate a wild enough menu like multi-roasters can.
Can't have 15 coffees on bar.
15 different coffees.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
20 different roasters from all over the world. We literally cannot roast.
Revolver.
We can't roast 20 different origins and do all the hard work of sourcing all that and making sure it's up to quality. Like that's like, they should be crushing and shining. Yeah. Because it's curating, it's fitting that need, that scratching that itch. And I think also just the entire experience overall. I mean, there's just got to be like creative ways that you can up it. And I think I don't know. Again, this could be a little too harsh, and maybe this is ignorant from my perspective because I've never owned a cafe or ran a cafe. But hitting the coffee metric should be like a given.
Yeah.
And then all this other stuff, like what you mentioned, the chairs, maybe the serving, the coffee card, whatever those is, those actually just have to up it even more.
Yeah.
So you should walk in and be like, this is extraordinary coffee. This matches at least my home setup.
Yeah.
Oh, but then there's these little touches that is like the garnishes that make it worth the $8-9. And the problem is like somebody might say, oh, like that's just the cost of things. But I mean, if the exchange doesn't, is it fair?
Dude, the reality is you're not reinvesting into new chairs every month.
Yeah.
It is an upfront big cost, let's say. You know what I mean? Or tables, or it is an upfront and it's a major cost.
Yeah.
But that's not a cost that's happening regularly. The cost that is regularly changing, is the coffee. Yeah. If you're rotating coffees decent amount, for sure. It's the cost of goods that are actually like being used every single day. The build out, you better have built out a cafe from the perspective of like, hey, my coffee is not the main attraction.
Right.
Or at least this cafe is going to reflect my coffee.
Right.
You know what I mean? You have to build it out with that intent because again, and I don't have a problem, like even as a cafe manager, sending people to other cafes or wearing like one of baristas a long time ago asked me like, or maybe it was recent. Oh yeah, it was recent. A barista asked me, he's like, whoa, I can't believe you're wearing an Intelligentsia shirt. Aren't they a competitor? I'm like, dude, what? Are you serious? Dude, who gives a rip?
Dude, yeah, let's rock Intelligentsia.
Like, I'm rocking a Black Cat espresso crop top. Dude, of course. Like, why wouldn't I?
Anything but maybe a Starbucks apron.
I don't know.
That may be pushing the line.
That is pushing personal ethics, like right there. Like that's pushing the line. But like, I don't have a problem saying like, I like this cafe too.
Yeah. What do you think from on top of maybe some of the stuff that we've mentioned? What do you think is maybe one or two other things that the cafe can do better or create, like public cuppings and stuff like that?
Yeah.
That can help bring value to folks that already have killer setups at home.
Yeah.
Because that number is growing of people having killer setups.
Yeah. I think one idea, like you and I have talked about, like how do we create the cafe experience to be a little more interactive? Right? And this is pretty niche, but how do you create a cafe experience where someone like a home barista, like, and this is a big, again, like if you're a home barista and you're listening to this podcast is really about you because you've brewed coffee so well that now we have to challenge ourselves in how to bring you into our cafe. Yeah. Like this is about you. So don't ignore the fact that this is about you.
And if you have recommendations,
please
share.
Yeah. We want to know.
Yeah.
Like, the reality is like, like how I even think about it as myself, like what, if I didn't have a coffee job where I was working behind the bar, like what would I want to experience, in a cafe as a barista, more than just drinking a cup of coffee. And I think it would be really, really cool to have like field trip days, like where like home baristas actually get to like pretend they're a barista or brew their own coffee or something along the lines of like to be a little more interactive. It's similar to cuppings because cuppings are kind of like field trip days where you go into maybe a cafe, someone prepares, talks about the coffee, introduces the coffee, and you get to experience the taste of coffee without having to really buy it. Yeah. Without having to really mess up your brew. Like, I think those are cool. We've done some of those. We've seen, I mean, even when Juan Diaz from Nowhere Coffee came in and brought some samples, we opened it to the public, and we have great community building aspects to it, but also nerdiness. Like you can geek out about coffee and talk about stuff. It brings a eclectic group of people that are like super niche. Right. Like, one, how do we do that on maybe a bigger scale that has to do maybe more or less, not necessarily around the coffee, but something else that is coffee related? Right. And I'm also not talking about the fact, let's start a chess club. That's not what I'm talking about. Right. How can it still be rigged towards the home barista? Because that's our topic right now. and what can we bring in? And I think like a field trip day where maybe come in and try the new, fellow kettle. I don't know. Like try the new, like all coffee is brewed on the Aiden. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. And again, not the cliche of like, let me teach you how to brew this.
Yeah.
No, let me give you the fellow Aiden. You brew a batch brew for me.
Yeah. Let's just more like, I mean, what if there was like a Weber EG1 that was up for grabs, or like you can come in and it's like, hey, we have a bunch of coffee roasted, just brew it, enjoy a cup for yourself.
Right.
And this is like kind of like an open station for you to just like, I mean, that's cool.
I think. Is this pushing it too far? What if you created like a gear and tool coffee library?
Yeah.
You come in and you check out the fellow Aiden for a week. Like you had max, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can have a membership.
That might be tough for business wise.
I don't know. I don't know.
Like insurance wise,
things could break.
Doesn't come back
it doesn't come back. Like I'm just like brainstorming live right now. Like I think that would be cool. And I think if you're a home barista, I'm just trying to sit in the shoes, because I was a home barista for a long time before I got a barista job.
Yeah.
And I think one, knowledge. We've talked about knowledge. There's a lot of accessibility around knowledge now, more than when I was starting back in the mid 2000s. Like way more knowledge. So the knowledge part, I feel like creating another class. Okay, maybe because some person it would be better. Yeah. Sure, but the whole idea of like, I never imagined using these fancy grinders if I couldn't buy one.
Right.
So we have to rethink now the incentive of, as a home barista, how can we bridge that gap? Welcome folks who do an excellent job at home. They're not professionals, and create that in the space of a cafe, of course.
Yeah. If you're a home barista, please drop a comment, send a DM, send an email. We'd love to hear some feedback and some thoughts. Interesting. Well, that's a wrap, folks. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Coffee Roaster Warm Up Sessions podcast. And as we always say, remember, reflect what's good.